This might be the most underrated cue in the history of baseball to actually increase pitching velocity. And this cue is to throw through the target. And there are many reasons that are backed by science that actually shows why this cue can actually really be helpful for you to increase pitching velocity. By the way, I'm Josh Guest and I co-founded the Pitcher Lab. I played 7 years of professional baseball where I got up to 98 miles an hour. And now I'm training to throw 100 miles an hour. So I think about this stuff all day. Now, if you need help with gaining pitching velocity, first link in the description, you can book a call with us and we'll see if it's the right fit for you. The first study that I read about this was that, everyone talks about hip to shoulder separation. And yeah, 80% of pitching velocity comes from hip to shoulder separation. So growing up, even when I was playing with the Phillies and the Rangers, a lot of the time, everyone would be like, oh, throw through the target, right? And I was kind of like, that's kind of eyewash, I'm a professional pitcher. I don't need to be told to throw through the target, like I know that. But one of the studies that I read was from Tom House. And basically what he was saying was that 80% of pitching velocity comes from the separation that you create, hip to shoulder separation, right? And the rotational aspects of throwing, which makes sense. That torque here accounts for about 80% of pitching velocity, and that's why you can throw 80% of your max velocity in theory off of your knees, right? Without even using your legs. And so that's why people are like, oh, the other 20% comes from your legs. But the study actually showed that the other 20% was how well you actually track toward the target and you're able to direct energy through the target, okay? And so that's where this cue comes in, which is throw through the target. And so if we break down this cue for a second, if we think about, okay, we're gonna throw through the target, then naturally, right, we're gonna convert all of this rotational energy that we created with the hip to shoulder separation, and we're gonna stop it to be able to direct it all toward the plate. One of the big things that I see a lot of kids do is that, and this is something that I made a mistake with the Phillies and the Rangers, I created a delivery that I would just pull off, right? I would pull off, I was trying to create so much power just with rotation that this was kind of how I was throwing, which was I'll pull as hard as I could with my glove side, and then this would just whip through, right? And it feels explosive, it feels whippy, it feels like I'm gonna throw gas. But what's actually happening is that I'm leaking a lot of energy going toward this way, right? There's a lot of energy going this way rather than it being, all through the target, okay? And so if you look at a bunch of high-level guys, Yamamoto is one of the best at this, and I love watching him because, when he throws, right, he's not spinning off or anything. He is lifting his leg. All of his energy is going toward the target, and he even finishes, right, by going forward, okay? He doesn't finish by going, spinning off like this or anything like that. All of his energy, right, you can see he's a smaller guy. So he has to create a bunch of momentum down the mound toward the target and even finish through the target, right? And so he basically comes right here, all of his energy comes through and is finishing right through the target. Okay, and so that's why he's maximizing that last 20% of pitching velocity, which is actually tracking toward the target and throwing through the target. And one of the biggest things that actually helps you with this is to keep a still head, okay? The head, as people say, oh, the body follows where the eyes go, and this is partially true. If you want to throw through the target, right, you want to keep a pretty quiet, still head. One of the biggest places for this is, for example, with the leg lift, okay? What I used to do when, I was throwing about low to mid 90s was that I would have a big stance and then I would rock back, right? And my head was moving a lot. And that actually makes it a lot harder for me to actually direct all of that energy through the target versus if I had just gone, and this is what I was doing when I was throwing, more in the upper 90s, 96, 97, 98, was I would come here and it was very direct right here. So I'm drifting and it was a quiet head and all my energy is just going forward through the target. There was no, rocking back and forth, rotation, all of this stuff. It was just a quiet, very quiet, okay, I'm going straight to the target. Bang! And I'll throw through it, okay? The other thing where the head comes into effect is when you're starting to throw, right? And you're ready to fire when you're here. The one thing that I had come into a really bad habit of was, you know, doing a bunch of pivot pickoffs and stuff because, you know, I was a big driveline guy, and that got me to the mid 90s, and so it worked. But for me to get to, you know, the upper 90s and even to throw 100, what I kind of realized was that I had to repattern my upper half to where it wasn't as rotational. And so what I would do a lot was just do this drill, you know, half-ass it, not doing it properly. If I were to do it properly, it'd look more like this, you know, where all of the energy is directed forward, but I would kind of just, you know, bang, you know, catch it behind my back, do all of this stuff. And it was creating a very rotational upper half. And so that was reflecting in my delivery, where I would get ready to fire, and then all I would do was pull my glove side, and it would just rotate as hard as I could, right? And this was pulling my head this way when I was throwing, because I needed to get energy from somewhere, right? I needed to get energy, and all I would do, pull and throw like that. And obviously that affected my command. It also affected my velocity. What you actually would want to do is the head works forward and downwards, okay? And so you're drifting, you get that burst of energy from the back leg, you're ready to fire, and then the head just goes down and forward, okay? It's tracking through the target, rather than right here, and then you're pulling off and throwing, okay? Now, this is what a lot of the highest level guys, another really good guy is Mizrowski right now, who throws in the low hundreds. He does this so well, where his head is just tracking through the target at all times. Just bang, bang, okay? And it's very linear. All of the energy is going through the target rather than it just being like a rotational thing, okay? Now, the last way to really be able to, you know, track towards the target and throw through the target is the use of your back leg, okay? And so, you know, when I was throwing in the low to mid 90s, and it's not slow, by the way, and so, you know, I had made a lot of mistakes even when I was throwing low to mid 90s. But what I was feeling was I would drop and I would just try to rotate as much as I could, okay? I would rotate as hard as I could, which, you know, was powerful and everything like that, but it would create a rotational delivery. Also, keep in mind that I was a very crossbody guy, right? I would stride across my body, and all I would do was just rip, like, rotationally. And, you know, I was throwing in the mid 90s that way, where I would just bang, just rip it like that. But it just wasn't a sustainable way of throwing, right? Like, I had a bunch of forearm stuff happen, and you know, for me to get to like the upper 90s and even to the 100 mark, like that just wasn't the way I was going to get there. And I kind of like knew that because it took a lot of effort to be able to, you know, stride cross the body and then rip it. And it was causing all sorts of lower back issues because, you know, all of that torque on the lower back. And so adjustment I made was I want to be more like weight shift, okay? I'm just shifting my weight from my back leg to my front leg. And I've talked about this before, which is, you know, it's not a jump, but all you're doing is putting force into the ground, right? When you put force into the ground, you can kind of feel the energy come back up, right? It's not like a low load. It's kind of like a put force into the ground. Kind of like if you're doing a vertical jump, right? You're putting force into the ground. That's kind of what you want to feel. This, it might feel more of like a skater jump, right? That's the force that you might feel with this. So you're feeling that, and now all you're doing is getting to the front leg. Bang. Okay? It's not about, oh, I'm rotating as hard as I, no, it's put force into the ground, now get to the front leg. Now, it might look like I'm jumping onto my front leg, but this is actually what's happening with guys like Shane McClanahan, right? Who looks like he's jumping off, but what's actually happening is it's putting a lot of force into the ground, and this is just happening naturally, okay? It's not like an active, oh, I'm driving off the mound or anything like that. It's more of a reflexive movement. And so I like to call it more of an impulse, where you can really feel this burst of energy and then you're getting to your front leg. And what this actually helps you with is stay in line, right? And so if you're drifting, bang, get to the front leg and throw. Bang. Okay, everything is through the target rather than being rotational. Another cue that could really work is, you know, finishing through and like actually taking your body through the target, okay? You know, if you ever did like pull downs, right? And you're sprinting, turning, and then you're throwing, and then it kind of like all that momentum propels you forward. That's kind of like the feeling that I want in my pitching delivery. Is like I'm creating so much momentum down the mound that, you know, when I block and I throw, it's still like throwing me forward. And so that's kind of feeling that I love. And I know that when I'm doing that correctly, I'm gonna throw harder. Okay, and so it can look something like this where, okay, drift, impulse, throw yourself forward. Okay, and now the caveat to that is that you don't want to just throw yourself forward without a good lead leg block, right? You still need a block and everything like that, but it's more about there's so much energy going forward that it actually, you know, takes you forward, okay? And so that's kind of like the three things I think about in terms of, okay, throwing through the target and how that can really help your pitching velocity. It's helped me, you know, gain about like 3 to 4 miles an hour, just like that, by actually working on, okay, going through the target rather than, oh, I'm just gonna rotate as hard as I can. I think the last part to actually tracking toward the target is the glove side, okay? And so, again, like I talked about a little bit, if you're not able to, you know, block with your front side and actually propel your arm forward, then you're gonna get rotational because you don't wanna be like here, pull, and then throw, right? You want the glove side to be the front leg block of the upper half. You need everything to block and then the upper half comes through, okay? And so, you know, there's a big thing about, you know, we want to create this glove arm going this way and then throwing, right? That's actually something that was really holding me back, right? When you see Sasaki does this really well, Roki Sasaki, he actually gets his glove side like inside his front leg so that this is all blocked. It creates this like crashing effect for this upper half to really catapult forward, okay? And so think about the glove side as more of a block rather than it being like something where you get energy from, okay? It's more of like a wall that's stopping this rotational energy and converting it into energy through the target. To recap, okay, you want to keep your head still and tracking through the target rather than pulling off, okay? And this can really help your direction and energy flowing through the target. I also really like the drive leg, keeping that drive leg impulse, shifting weight through the target rather than trying to, you know, actively rotate your back leg or anything like that. Also the front side, right? Acting as a block to stop that rotational energy and convert it into more linear energy through the target, okay? And so those are the things that I think about. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. The last thing that I didn't really touch on is arm action, okay? You know, and this is kind of out of the scope of this video, but you do want to make sure that your arm is, you know, directing toward the plate rather than it like flying out like this. And this is something that I struggled with a lot, which was that my arm would fly out this way, right? And this was my arm action, bang, rather than it tracking toward the plate. Okay, and this is more of like a velocity thing. Obviously, it can help velocity, but it's a lot more like a health thing as well, where you don't want your forearm to be flying out this way. You want it to be tracking toward the target so that, you know, you get every ounce of energy into behind the ball rather than it like going around the ball.